let's talk about first tools that are going to be really useful for you right away. Now, I'm just going to first demonstrate bringing something from outside of Photoshop into Photoshop. Okay, this is a common thing you're going to need. Sometimes you're going to want a reference image. Sometimes you're going to want something to look at. Sometimes you're going to want a color palette. Sometimes you're going to want a tracing template. Sometimes you're going to want all these things from outside of the Photoshop program that are not currently in your image. So imagine I want to sketch a blowfly. Let's search blowfly. Let's just grab an image. Let's say I want to reference this for the detail and the color scheme. Okay, so what you can do is you can just right click, copy, and you should be able to just literally directly paste this, and it should automatically come in as a new layer. Okay, so I can do blowfly layer. Now, let me say that for your projects, you are allowed reference images, but I do not want you guys to trace. Okay, I want you guys to get away from tracing, because tracing isn't teaching your brain. It's not forcing your brain to wire, to look for patterns in painting, to look for how to draw things, how to make lines, how to make shapes. I don't want you guys to get in the habit of tracing. Sometimes you're going to need to trace, and sometimes tracing is going to be real useful for generating things real quickly. But I don't want you to get in the habit of tracing. So I'm just using this as an example. But I will show you how to trace, because, again, sometimes to start off in Photoshop, sometimes it can just be too intimidating. And so sometimes you need to take on an easier task. And so sometimes tracing can be a lot less intimidating for students' first sort of projects, their first sort of attempts, okay, at making marks. Until they get real comfortable, then I no longer want you to trace. So what I want to say is, trace or not trace, in the beginning, we're going to allow you to have some crutches, okay? And so a tracing in theory might be a crutch, and eventually you need to get strong enough where your brain no longer needs that, okay? Because tracing is sort of derivative, and you want to sort of avoid being derivative of other content that other people have made. You want to be the person that other people steal from. You don't want to be the person stealing from other people, okay? But let me show you how to do this. So if you got a template, okay, and imagine you wanted to start a project by just like trying to make marks that look kind of like this thing, okay? You can take this layer, you can reduce the opacity, boom, okay? And then you're all of a sudden now tracing over top. And if you said layer, new layer, boom, on top of the blowfly, now you can actually like trace on top. And you could zoom in and get an idea for what those pixels look like, okay? Zoom back out. So everybody should just sort of practice grabbing something from outside of Photoshop and bringing it in. And so a very, very common thing that's very, very useful is if you're going to do an illustration of a blowfly, for example, you might grab a couple reference images, okay? This one is great for the sort of like metallic detail, metallic coloring schemes, okay? So you might bring this one in, and you might put it here, and you might grab one more. Let's grab this one. This one's sort of a darker blue. This looks like a sarcophagus. Let's bring this one in. So practice just sort of bringing items into Photoshop, okay? Now we have three sort of references, and if we wanted to try to draw our own blowfly, we have some easy references. We don't have to close the program. We can just look up top. And now I want to use these images to show you some quick tools that you're going to use a lot in the Photoshop program. So often the first thing you need to do is literally like grab something, grab an object. So this tool right here, this little crossbar, this is called the Move tool, okay? And you can use this to grab items, and it should automatically select their layer. So their layer becomes selected. So if you want to identify what layer something is on, you can click on that object with the Move tool, and then that layer will become highlighted. You have to be careful, though, because if there's layers over top another layer, you're obviously going to get the layer on top. So you have to be careful. So if I want to just move this one, bring it down, grab the move tool, just grab it and position it where you want to position it. Okay, so now let me show you the selection tool. Imagine there was, for some reason, we wanted to cut the head off this thing. We could use this tool, this little box, which is the selection tool. Click that, okay? And we could highlight the region we wanted to move. Now we can click the move tool and we can literally like move that wherever we wanted to move that, okay? So that, you want to practice being able to do that. Now, that's moving something in the context of a box, which is not always helpful. Sometimes, right, like we want to move an item that is not in the shape of a box. So there's this other tool called the Lasso Tool, okay? And if you click on the Lasso Tool, you can use the Lasso Tool to lasso whatever shape you want using your mouse, okay? And then once you have that selected, you can grab that and you can move that. So if I wanted to position a head somewhere, maybe this thing has a really long neck and I'm going to draw a really long neck or something, I can move that over, okay? So that's the selection tool and the lasso tool. Now let me show you, hang on a sec. Now let me show you, there are variants of these tools, okay? So underneath the lasso tool, if you right click, there are different forms of this. Okay, there is a tool called the magnetic lasso tool. So if I can select that, if I wanted to grab this leaf, what I can do is the magnetic lasso tool, it has artificial intelligence which recognizes sort of shapes. And so I can use the magnetic, it's going to have problems here. I'm going to use the magnetic lasso tool to sort of grab this leaf, okay? And sometimes this works in some contexts, sometimes it doesn't work in some contexts, but you can use this to grab sort of shapes. Oh. I messed up the end there, but you can use this to grab sort of shapes and move them, the magnetic lasso tool. Okay, let me step back. So we're talking about different ways to select items. Now there's another way. Imagine you had sort of a color you wanted to select. Imagine you wanted to erase this brown background. There is a tool for this. There is a tool called right over here called the magic wand tool. The magic wand tool, okay? And if you select the magic wand tool and you have your layer selected and you click on the color, it can find that color, okay? So it's found now this brown pattern throughout this image. And sometimes this is very useful to quickly sort of grab a background with the magic wand tool, and then you can erase a background if you grab the eraser tool. And you could, in theory, like erase the background, okay? Now again, I'm just doing this quick. So if I wanted to get this back here, this background here that didn't get erased, grab the magic wand tool, grab that, and then you can erase it. Boom, things like this. So sometimes this is very useful. Obviously, this doesn't look very good, okay? But sometimes this is useful to quickly sort of separate out the items that you want is using these various selection tools. So rectangular selection tool, the lasso selection tool, the magnetic lasso selection tool, and the magic wand. Now, another reason you want to select items, many times you will have drawn particular items. So imagine I have a layer. Let's put this layer on top, and let's draw some hairs here. Let's make some hairs. Imagine I was going to add some hairs to some insect that I was working on. Okay. Oftentimes we want to replicate an item that we've created, okay? And you can do this with copy paste. So once it's selected, once this layer has selected, I could use the lasso tool to select these marks that I want to copy, and I can hit edit, copy, edit, paste. And then in a new layer, it's going to paste these exact same marks. So oftentimes it's very useful to make a few marks and then just duplicate those marks. And this is one reason why Photoshop can be so fast, because we could make some marks, duplicate those marks a whole bunch of times, okay? And then we could, in theory, fuse all of these layers, merge the layers, and now they're one thing. We could edit, copy this, and continually, iteratively do this until we had all the hairs that we wanted, okay? So this is a very, very useful thing to be able to duplicate items that we've already made to modify our image. Now, sometimes we're not satisfied with the positioning of these items or of these layers. So I want to walk you through a couple transformations, which can be very useful in your Photoshop experience. So one of the things we can do is we can flip. So the way that you do this is you have your layer selected, you have the item that you want to flip selected, and then you can do edit, transform, and there's many different transformations, okay? We could flip it horizontal, boom. We could flip it the other way. We could transform, flip it vertical, boom. And oftentimes quick flips like this are very, very useful because insects are symmetrical. So imagine you had a layer, imagine you were going to do a butterfly, okay? And you had a beautiful butterfly drawn out. You only have to draw half the butterfly because what you can do is you can edit, copy, paste, and then take this element and flip it, edit, transform. Let's flip it horizontal, and then you can piece it together. So oftentimes when you're doing insects or any organism that's symmetrical, sometimes you only have to spend half the time doing half the organism, and then you can just create a perfectly symmetric copy of it, move it together and position it properly through your layers, through your selection, through your transformations, and then you could, in theory, merge these. Let's merge these layers, layer 5, layer 4, into one unit. Okay, so this is very, very useful concept. Copy, pasting, flipping, transforming. And then you can also rotate. So if you have the move tool and your layer selected, you can grab this and you can rotate it, move it, position it any way that you want it. And oftentimes what I find myself doing especially with insects is if I draw a particular leg, sometimes I'll draw that particular leg on a different layer. Imagine this is a leg that I had drawn. Oftentimes I will tweak the proportions of this thing. I will make it bigger, smaller, shift its fatness, make it thin, make it long, etc. And I'll figure out the one that's most proportionally accurate, okay? And then I can sort of move it to its spot. And if I want to position it in a different manner, I can position it in a different manner. See? So many, many, many kinds of possibilities are possible with these basic Photoshop tools.